podcast. This is Amy Killingsworth. I'm your host, and I'm super excited about today because we are talking about pillar number 2, sovereignty. And I hate that it's pillar number 2, even though I'm the one that made it pillar 2, because it really is the most important pillar. So these are not necessarily in order of importance, because if they were, sovereignty would be pillar number 1. But it's important for you to have a solid understanding of identity before we go forward with sovereignty, because these concepts and these precepts build one on top of the other. So identity kind of underlies it, but sovereignty is the linchpin on which the entire thing hinges. So, without further ado, let's talk about it. What is sovereignty? Well, as far as the definition goes, sovereignty is supreme authority or rule. It's also the idea of self-governance. So, when a country is sovereign, it has the ability and is within its legal capacity to rule and reign itself. And so even the monarch in a country is often called the sovereign. And that's the one person that is in charge of making the decisions for the company, for the country. And even the CEO could be the sovereign of a company. So sovereignty is part of being human. It's an element of being human. And anytime we're talking about humanity or the human experience, it's really helpful to look at the archetype, and that is God. So we are created in the image and likeness of God. So our sovereignty is really a reflection of our Creator's sovereignty. So let's talk about the sovereignty of God, and then we'll talk about how our sovereignty looks like that and maybe differs a little bit from that. So the sovereignty of God is the fact that He has supreme authority, control, and rule over all that is in the entire multiverse. All that exists is under the authority and control and rule of God. And if you've been in church or you've been around religious institutions, I'm sure that you have heard the saying, God is sovereign. And we usually say that when He does something that we don't understand or that we didn't want Him to do. So, and that's actually a really great thing to say, because His ways are higher than our ways. And He sees things and knows things, obviously, that we don't. And He doesn't need our permission, and He acts the way that He acts in the way that He needs and wants to act. And He's well within His sovereignty to do so. So we're made in the image. God has made us in His image and granted us free will. And free will is really the seat. It's where our sovereignty resides. So God's sovereignty supersedes our sovereignty. So even though we have sovereignty, God's sovereignty is sort of the overarching sovereignty over ours. Example of that is, let's say that I wanted to develop a nuclear weapon and blow up the world. Well, if it's not in God's plan for the entire world to blow up, then He's going to interrupt my sovereignty with circumstances that block what I'm planning. So I find a lot of comfort in that, in the fact that God's sovereignty supersedes man's sovereignty. And not only is He concerned about the whole planet, at the same time, He's concerned about your individual life. And so you can trust Him. You can trust Him to handle what is not yours to handle, or what you're not able to handle, which is other people's free will choices and sovereignty. So this is going to be important and tie back in when we get to the radical responsibility piece. But that's what sovereignty is. So let's talk about what sovereignty is not. So sovereignty is not the ability or the right to lord over others. So when the princess or the prince gets a hold of sovereignty, they like to take it and be like, I'm the boss, I'm sovereign. And it's more of a rebellion. So sovereignty is not rebellion. We can use our sovereignty for the purposes of rebelling, but the exercise of sovereignty by itself is not rebellion. So it's really important, again, to look at the nature of God. And in God's kingdom, there is authority. God is the ultimate authority. And then we come under God's authority and we exercise our own authority over what we've been given to rule and reign over, which for these purposes, for the discussion of sovereignty, is really ourselves. Sovereignty is self-rule. Well, when we're in rebellion, we're not like God. We're like the devil. The rebellion is a characteristic of Satan and not God. So an example of this is to be like, well, how many of us find ourselves in rebellion, like eating something that we're not supposed to eat, or doing something that we know is not something that we're supposed to do. That's rebellion, not sovereignty. So I really want you to get that juxtaposition, because sovereignty is not, oh, I can do whatever I want to do. You can, and that's your free will choice. But sovereignty is really the exercise or the combination of authority and responsibility. And it's the very opposite of rebellion. So I want you to get that. I want you to get that juxtaposition, that sovereignty is a combination of responsibility and authority, not rebellion. It is not rebellion. You can rebel. You can use your sovereignty to rebel, but rebellion itself is not sovereignty. It's something different. So sovereignty is also autonomy and personal power. And again, this is really important, but it's a combination of radical responsibility and authority. And a follow-on concept to that is that you can give your authority away, but you can't give your responsibility away. Okay? You can give your authority away, but you can't give your responsibility away. And we see this a whole bunch in our world today with all of the gurus and the influencers and the experts. Often we give our authority away to an influencer or an expert or a pastor or a guru, instead of doing the hard work of the critical thought and responsibility for our own lives. And when you do that, you can give your authority away and just do what the expert told you to do, to take that medical therapy or to eat that or to abstain from that. You can do that. But the responsibility or the resulting action or the circumstance that action creates is your responsibility. It's your responsibility. So if you take a medical intervention because the CDC said so, or because you saw it on the news that that's what you're supposed to do, and you have a reaction and you get sick or maybe even die, that's yours. That responsibility is yours. That effect of your choice, of your giving away of your authority, is yours. You can give the authority away, but you cannot give the responsibility away. So another way of saying that is that you can give the decision making or the critical thought process away, but you can't give the consequence away. It's a little bit different way of saying that. So that's a discussion of God's sovereignty, and what ours is in relation to that is that God has made us in his image and created us with free will. He's granted us free will, and we can use our free will to choose to give our sovereignty away. When we give our sovereignty away, the king or the queen abdicates the throne. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I covered this in a lot of detail in the last episode. So episode 1 of season 2 is all about identity. And we talk about this concept that there are 4 potential identities. 3 of them are the lower nature or the flesh, and that's the prisoner, the slave, and the prince or the princess. And one of them is the manifestation of our authentic divine self, which is the king or the queen. And that's really our true nature and who we were created to be. So if you don't understand those concepts, you haven't listened to episode 1, go back and listen to that, because again, these build one on top of the other. So this idea of the throne is that the throne cannot be empty. the throne always has somebody sitting on it of those four. So if the king or the queen abdicates the throne by giving their authority away, then one of the other three is going to take the place of the king or queen. And that's almost always going to be the slave. And you can see that because of victim energy and blame. When the king or queen has abdicated the throne through giving their authority away, the slave takes the place, and there's the victim mentality and the blame to prove it. So since sovereignty is our power, then giving our authority away, giving our sovereignty away, is giving our power away. In Rise to Reign Speak, I often say, take back your power and take the limits off your life, or take back your power and live life without limits. So in Rise to Reign, it's a process of taking back our power and walking in sovereignty. So the identity piece is the rise. So that's, if you think about like going from the slave girl, or from the prisoner to the slave to the prince and princess to the king and queen, that's like the rise up through the different identities. Sovereignty is the reign. Sovereignty is reigning over ourselves and over our kingdom or our queendom, our realm, our domain. So with Rise to Reign, we take back our power. We walk in our authority. We stand in our sovereignty. And so it's helpful to know how we know if we've given our authority away. Well, the way that you know that is, I've already alluded to it, is you find yourself in blame. You find yourself constantly blaming, like looking for who or what is at fault, instead of using your energy to solve a problem or be at effect. It's like the difference of being at cause versus being at effect. So blame is the enemy of sovereignty. So what is the opposite of blame? Well, it's radical responsibility. So radical responsibility is really just a firm commitment that you're not going to engage in blame. So the sovereign, or the king or the queen, takes responsibility for everything in their reality, even when it's not their fault. And this idea of blame is really, there's most people, it's hardwired into the human experience and into human consciousness. And most people, if they're honest, will see that they have an addiction to blame. It's just kind of part of our nature, but not our true nature. Part of our lower nature is really, really steeped in blame. So what is blame? Let's unpack the concept of blame so that we can see it and shine a light on it and hopefully begin to dismantle it. So blame is really the assignment of fault. And fault denotes failure, a mistake, wrongdoing, defect, or error. And so when fault is assigned or accusations are made, it automatically triggers the feeling of shame. And shame is the most intolerable feeling to humans. Humans absolutely cannot house shame. It's just the worst, most awful feeling. So what we all automatically do is try to get it off of us as fast as we can. And that is the process of blame, is really taking the shame and like throwing it on you or on a circumstance. Another way of saying this is projection. And so we're going to talk about projection in another episode. It's a psychological term that means that I'm taking like what I'm experiencing and what I'm dealing with, and I'm projecting it onto you, and I see it in you, but it's really the source of it is from me. So that process of projection is really a blaming. It's a taking of our feelings of shame and throwing them onto another person or a circumstance. Responsibility, however, so if fault denotes failure, a mistake, a wrongdoing, a defect, or an error, responsibility is having the burden to respond or being called to account and being at cause instead of being at effect. So when you're blaming, you're at effect saying that circumstance or that person is why I did that or why that happened to me. And it's a lot of really useless energy. When you put your energy into blame, into assigning blame, you're really looking for who or what is at fault. Responsibility focuses the attention and the effort on the issue, on solving the problem, on acknowledging it and taking action. So, taking responsibility for everything, regardless of fault, is how we take back our power and exercise our sovereignty. So, I have a really awesome, I think, tool that I created that helps us take responsibility, and it's called the responsibility reset. So when you find yourself in victim energy, when you find yourself in blame, the responsibility reset helps you identify that and make a different choice. So the responsibility reset goes like this, and there's a graphic that goes with it, and I'll add it to the blog. You can go to amykillingsworth.com/podcast, and you can see this graphic. But the equation goes like this. So reality plus blame equals fault. So whatever's going on, the circumstance, the issue, plus blame equals fault. Reality minus blame equals responsibility. And acknowledgement plus action equals proof of responsibility. So this is the idea of repentance. Repentance is really simply just making a different choice and realizing, okay, that's not working. Let's do this instead. And changing your ways or changing your approach. So again, the responsibility reset is reality plus blame equals fault. And reality minus blame equals responsibility. And in order to have proof of responsibility, you have to have acknowledgement. So that is that this issue exists, that we're in this situation or this is going on without assigning blame, but then taking action. And then you have proof that you've taken responsibility. When you've acknowledged without blame and you take action, then you have proof of responsibility. So I have a tool, I didn't create it, but I have a tool that I have found that is so useful in helping me remember to take radical responsibility for my own, for what is going on inside of myself. So we're talking about self-governance. We're talking about what is going on with me, what is going on inside of me. And there is a Hawaiian concept called ho'oponopono. And it's basically just a saying when you are triggered or when you find yourself in a situation or circumstance. You say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And so this is highly offensive to a lot of people when they first hear it. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you're driving along on the freeway and somebody cuts you off in traffic and you have to slam on your brakes and, maybe your purse flies off the seat and hits and everything falls out on the ground and you get super mad and maybe you flip that person off or you honk or you say some choice words and, get really angry. And so with Ho'oponopono, you would then notice yourself reacting that way to the circumstance. And you would then say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And that's when people get really offended by this. Is like, wait a second, he cut me off. Why do I have to say I'm sorry? And let me be clear. I'm not talking about codependency. I'm not talking about taking a responsibility for somebody else's actions or words. That is another podcast for another time. We're going to talk about codependency and boundaries. But what I am talking about is taking radical responsibility for what's going on inside of you. So it is said that hard times or difficulties don't create a person, they reveal a person. So I'll say that again. hard times or difficulties or adversity doesn't create a person, it reveals a person. So when you have something come up against you and it bumps you or triggers you, what comes out of you in that moment was already there. It was already there, and it's stemming from a wound or a trauma or something that you have internalized that needs to come up and out and be processed and healed, and repentance, a change of pace, a change of ways needs to take place in that area. So if somebody cuts me off in traffic and what I have inside of me is righteousness, peace, and joy, then righteousness, peace, and joy is all that can come out because that's all that's in there. But if I have anger and if I have blame and if I have, bad feelings about people and I get bumped and that's what's come out, that's what was in there. And that it's very useful. It's very useful for me to see that, take a look at that, acknowledge it, take responsibility for that and heal it. We're going to talk about how to do that as the episodes go on. But for now, I just want you to get this idea of taking radical responsibility for what is going on with you. So when you say in that situation, if I were to Ho'oponopono, the guy that cut me off in traffic, I would say, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. Well, am I sorry for him cutting me off? No, I can't be sorry for his behavior. That was his choice. That was his behavior. That's his. What I'm saying that I'm sorry for is I'm sorry for judging you. I'm sorry for maybe flipping you the bird. I'm sorry for saying curse words or calling you a name or seeing you in a negative light or dishonoring you. That's what I'm sorry for, how I reacted. I'm sorry for my part. I'm sorry for how I interacted. So then it becomes, if you notice yourself going to, well, but if he never cut me off, then I would have never gotten mad. Now remember, that mad was laying in you dormant, because if it wasn't, a guy cutting you off in traffic couldn't bring it up. So this is how we really see ourselves. This is how we're able to take a look inside ourselves at what needs attention, what needs to be healed, because those things are the things that are holding us back. Those are the things polluting the well, so to speak. Maybe you're feeling a sense of boredom with your life, or maybe you're feeling stuck, or maybe you're feeling just angry or depressed or anxious. And there's a cause for that. There's a reason for that. There's something in you that's polluting the well, so to speak. And the process of healing is getting those things up and out and processing through those difficult emotions and healing them. Well, you can't know that they're there unless something bumps them and teases them to the surface. So that is really why these things happen to us in life. Another example, and I'll close with this, and I think a lot of you will be able to relate to it. But as a mother, I find myself feeling really protective and defensive of my kids. And I think that is completely normal. And I think it's healthy. But it's also an opportunity for introspection, and it's an opportunity for radical responsibility, and it's an opportunity for healing. So I have a daughter, and she's in middle school. And if any of you have daughters in middle school, you know that the mean girl dynamic is well alive and well. It is going strong. And so sometimes she will come home and she'll tell me something that was said to her or that transpired at school, and I will really find myself in a blind rage. My immediate reaction is just wanting to hurt middle school children, which obviously I don't do that because I'm not in jail. So I haven't followed through on that, thankfully. But that's often my initial response when she tells me something awful that was said or done to her. I see red. I fly immediately into just anger, just unbelievable anger. And sure, there's that protective instinct of the mama bear. And sure, I want, of course, I want my daughter to be happy and treated well, and it's wrong if she's not. So there's definitely that sense of violation of justice. But it's deeper than that. And it's really unhealed trauma and wounding from my own time in middle school. And I know that because of the work that I do and the way that I see it in clients and in workshop participants over and over and over again, is that is evidence that I have something inside of me that still needs to be lovingly addressed and healed. And so that adversity isn't creating the reaction in me, it's revealing what's already there. And that is a linchpin of healing and growth and emotional intelligence, because when we say that we want something, I think everybody's really on some level looking for their purpose or looking for their place in the world. And maybe you feel like there's something important that you want to do and that you want to be significant, you want to have an effect on the world. And maybe you've even said a prayer that you've asked God to reveal to you, like, show me what I'm doing, show me why I'm here on the earth, show me what I'm doing here. And so when you pray those prayers or when you put those requests out there, whether consciously or not, what you get is a process of healing and a process of development that actually prepares you to carry that calling and to walk it out. And in order to do that, you have to learn sovereignty. You have to learn to take responsibility for everything that pertains to you, everything that is going on inside of you. And so there will necessarily be triggers that tease those things to the surface, not because God's mean or wants to trigger you or aggravate you or toy with you, but because he wants you to heal. So if you take that response, if you take that hurt and you cast it away from you with blame, you have not gotten what it came for. And the cool thing is this, in the school of healing, you don't ever fail. You just get to take the test again and again and again and again. So if you find yourself in similar situations over and over and over again, maybe it's time to analyze and say, what I'm doing isn't working. Let me try it a different way. So I would like to propose to you to try sovereignty and to exercise, to take back your power, to take your authority, and to exercise radical responsibility by refusing to engage in blame and becoming curious about what's going on inside of you and going on with you, and becoming radically responsible for that. And again, I'll just remind you of the Ho'oponopono process of, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. Now we're going to go a lot deeper into these concepts. Right now I'm just kind of building the foundation so that we can start like framing it out and hanging it on the different concepts. So we take these 7 pillars. We just finished pillar number 2, sovereignty, identity. Pillar number 1, identity, was last week. We're going to go through the 7 pillars and then we're going to apply them to 7 categories. So the first category is body. So if we take sovereignty and apply it to our body, that just means that we exercise authority and responsibility where our body is concerned. And so with bodily sovereignty, a forced medical intervention would violate our bodily sovereignty. So we need to know about sovereignty and how it relates to our body so that we can live that life of authority, the combination of authority and responsibility. Because remember, you can give away your authority, but you can't give away your responsibility. So it's really, really, really important in the times that we're living in that we all know that we're wide awake and we know exactly what we're doing because we've given it critical thought and we've taken responsibility for everything that is going on in us and around us and with us. And so sovereignty has never been more important than it is today. And we're never more like God than when we are exercising sovereignty. So I hope you take this concept and I hope that you apply it to your life this week. We'll be back next week with another episode, and we'll be covering amnesty, which is really a process of radical forgiveness, and they all go together. So that's it for this episode of the Rise to Reign podcast. As always, thank you so much for your time, and I will see you in the next episode.